Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we will be discussing Game 7 of the regular season, Sharks versus Hurricanes, in which the Sharks managed to win 5-2. Now, you do have to preface this with the fact that the Hurricanes were on the second half of a tough back-to-back here against the Kings and the Sharks, but the Hurricanes were one of the best teams in the NHL, at least record-wise, 6-1 coming into this game, so the Sharks managing to take them down is a good sign, of course, moving forward. The Sharks not yet reaching the 500 mark. They are now 3-4 on a 3-game winning streak, but they're certainly getting there, and there has been very notable improvement in the past few games. Now, in the first period, the Sharks didn't look that great defensively. The Hurricanes were really laying it on, and thanks to the effort of Martin Jones, the Sharks only gave up a single goal to Dougie Hamilton, which was a very nice goal by the Hurricanes, I must say. But on the Sharks' end, while the defense maybe wasn't as great and was giving up a lot of pretty solid chances, the offense was there for the Sharks, or at least mostly for Evander Kane, as he potted a hat trick in the first period alone, which was the first time in Sharks history that happened. 2 of those coming on the power play for goals 2, 3, and 4 on the year. So at the end of the first, in one that you could arguably say the Hurricanes played better, the Sharks had the 3-1 lead. In the second period, the Sharks really started to clean up their game a bit. They didn't give up a goal, and they had the only goal of the period with Barclay Goodrow to make it 4-1 after 40 minutes. And in the third period, the Sharks did a solid job at killing off the clock. Erik Haula did make it somewhat close, 4-2 in the last few minutes of the game, off of a pretty lucky bounce, but it would be Tomas Hertl who would put it away with the 5-2 empty netter. And so you take a look at the progression of the defense so far this season. It was obviously very bad in the first few games of the year. In the Sharks' first win against the Blackhawks, it was also quite bad, but it got better against the Flames. It was pretty solid here tonight. Yes, they gave up a few too many great chances to the Hurricanes, but I think the main thing about it is that the Sharks aren't making so many disastrous turnovers, and it is a bit of a night and day situation from the first few games of the season and a lot of the games last season, where you're not seeing so many of the breakaways, the 2-on-1s, the 3-on-1s. There were actually, I don't think, any odd man rushes or any real odd man rushes. Maybe there was a 3-on-2 here or there, but no 2-on-1s or breakaways in this game for the Hurricanes. So it does show the progress the Sharks have made defensively this season. There's still a bit more to clean up in the defensive zone just as a unit, but it is nice that they're not giving grade A+ chances to the other team anymore for free. First thing to talk about would be Martin Jones, who had himself a very nice game here tonight. I had pointed out in the Calgary Flames game that Jones was solid but didn't have to be that great because the Sharks did a good job of limiting some of the chances for the Flames. Here tonight, while as I said there weren't so many disastrous turnovers, there were still a lot of good chances for the Hurricanes. He made some great saves, one on a one-timer from Brett Pesce. There was a flurry of chances on a power play in the second period, I believe, where he had to make a couple of beautiful toe saves. There was a couple of opportunities, one on Warren Foegele, I believe, as well, another toe save there, a couple good glove saves in the first period. So all looking very good for Martin Jones, who really seemed dialed in for most of the night. Now, 2 good games in a row. I don't want to speak too soon, especially with some of the inconsistencies Jones has shown for the past year at the very least. I've been burned too much here by Martin Jones, but it is hopefully the start of something going on right now, as Jones hasn't really looked this good in the regular season in a pretty long time, in a consistent stretch of games. Next to talk about would be the special teams, as of course the Sharks power play started off very well tonight. Evander Kane, 2 of his 3 goals on his hat trick were on the power play, the Sharks' first 2 power plays of the game. It was looking very smooth, some fantastic passes, great puck movement. The last 2 power plays 3 and 4, not so good, but certainly the first 2 makes up for that. But something that's even more interesting, I guess you could say, is that the Sharks' penalty kill has been very solid so far this year. Even coming into this game, despite the disastrous start to the season, the Sharks were actually 90% on the penalty kill, and they once again went perfect here tonight against the Hurricanes. So that does say that the Sharks were very bad at 5-on-5 earlier on this season, but it is still nice to see that the Sharks' penalty kill was playing well. They also had to kill off at 5-on-3. Logan Couture having a spectacular shift to be able to kill off the around 45 seconds that the Hurricanes had there, and of course Martin Jones making some good saves. And so the special teams, at the moment, it seems as though when the Sharks take a penalty or when the Sharks draw a penalty, they are in pretty good hands, which is a pretty big departure from how the power play started the season with the 3 shorthanded goals they let up. Next, to talk about would, of course, be Evander Kane. He had himself a very good game with the hat trick in the first period. The second and third periods not as apparent, although he had a very nice pass leading to the Tomas Hertl empty net goal, so a total of 4 points. Now, of course, Evander Kane did not get to play the first 3 games of the season, so he wasn't here for the terrible start for the Sharks, or at least most of the terrible start for the Sharks, having been suspended. And interestingly enough, I believe this was the first game that the Sharks have had the same linesman who had that altercation with Evander Kane this season thus far. And of course, Kane, I don't know if this is a coincidence or maybe he had something to prove. Kane ends up getting the 4 points, so kind of funny, certainly, that ended up being the case. And so it does go to show that Evander Kane does seem to be a pretty important part of this team. Of course, with the departures of Nyquist and Pavelski and all of these players, the Sharks really needed some of their top 6 forwards to step up. Hertl has begun to do that. Couture has been mostly solid for the majority of the year, and it's nice to see Kane have a big game here tonight. Finally, I will talk about Barclay Goodrow, not normally a player who gets a lot of attention, normally pretty much glued to the fourth line. He had locked down a permanent spot on the Sharks last season. He was actually one of the few players to actually play all 82 games for the Sharks. He's not even a player making $1 million, so never really thought of too much, but he certainly started to make a name for himself in the playoffs last season. While it wasn't a great playoffs as a whole, his 2 goals obviously stood out as the game winner in Game 5, as well as the most important game winner in Game 7 against the Golden Knights, one that will be remembered forever in the minds of Sharks fans. And so Goodrow will be etched in there for a long, long time, but it's nice to see him come out this season. As I said, with some of the departures to the Sharks and with the fact that Sorensen had that early injury, Evander Kane was suspended early, Patrick Marleau only just arrived in the last 3 games, that Goodrow has been able to play up the lineup and not looked too out of place. Now, he's not an extremely skilled player. He's not a 20-goal scorer. Even though he's got 3 goals here so far this season, I'd be very surprised if he actually managed to hit much more than 12, let's just say. But he seems to have fit in pretty well playing on the second or even on the third or even the second line. And it's because Goodrow is just such a hard worker. Now, of course, he's not necessarily a first-line player where you do really need to have that innate skill to be someone very useful on the fourth line. But when it comes to the second and third line, the hard work that Goodrow does put in to get to the corners, and he's still a pretty solid hockey player, allows him to really mesh well with a lot of the different players on the team. So you saw him get some pretty good chemistry with Thornton, some pretty good chemistry with Sorensen. And so that unbreakable duo, or at least I thought at the start of the season, of Goodrow and Karlsson, who I thought would hold down the fourth line for the Sharks, doesn't seem to be the case anymore. Goodrow finding himself on the third line, and it looked good tonight, so I'm sure we'll see it a lot more moving into the future. And it doesn't seem like the fourth line is any worse for wear, actually, as Radil, Gambrell, and Karlsson as a unit actually looked quite strong here tonight. Gambrell actually scored a goal in this game. It got called off for the high stick. It was a bit borderline, but they ended up calling it no goal on the ice at the time of the goal, and so it was very difficult to overturn, since it certainly could have gone either way. So unfortunate for Gambrell, still waiting for his first regular season goal in his career, as he only has the 1 goal in the playoffs. But all in all, it was a pretty solid game for the Sharks' fourth line, and Barclay Goodrow as well stood out on the third line with his goal. But that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action on Saturday. They will host the Buffalo Sabres, another team from the Eastern Conference who has had themselves a pretty solid season thus far. Surprised to see that the Sabres have managed to turn it around. They haven't been very good for the past few years. The Sharks have actually had a lot of trouble historically with the Sabres, but that was with a completely different Sabres team. We'll see how they look against another strong offensive powerhouse. Class dismissed.